3 decades of building homes for others couldn't prepare me for watching my own foundation crumble in a single afternoon. I'd spent my life measuring twice and cutting once, in construction and in marriage. But there was Amber, packing enough for a month, while telling me she needed 15 days to help Travis heal. My wife of 30 years, planning to stay with her ex-husband, the same ex she'd assured me was ancient history when I found those texts last year. Our daughter Emily called me controlling for questioning the arrangement. No one seemed to notice I was the only one still honoring the vows we made before God and family. What Amber didn't know, after 40 years managing construction projects, I'd learned to spot structural failures before collapse. And I'd already begun documenting the cracks in our foundation, financial, emotional, and soon legal. She thought she was leaving for 15 days. She had no idea she was never coming home to the same life. If you've ever felt your loyalty taken for granted, you'll understand what happens next. The evening light filtered through the custom blinds I'd installed myself, casting long shadows across the dining room table where my blueprints for the Henderson project were spread. From the living room, I could hear Amber's gentle laughter as she spoke on her phone, a sound that once warmed me but now raised questions I couldn't quite name. "That's perfect." "Yes, I'll see you Thursday," she said, her voice dropping slightly before she ended the call. I made 2 cups of tea, Earl Grey with a splash of milk for her, just as she'd liked it for 30 years, and carried them into the living room. The walls around us held the photographs of our life. Emily's graduation, our 25th anniversary cruise, the cabin I'd built at the lake using techniques my father taught me. "Tea?" I offered, setting her cup on the side table. Amber glanced up, her smile quick but not reaching her eyes. "Thanks, Jack." She returned immediately to her phone, scrolling through something that held her attention more completely than I had in months. "The Henderson project is almost ready for groundbreaking," I said, settling into my chair. "Should be my last major development before stepping back. We could finally plan that extended trip to the coast." "Oh yes, that would be nice." Her response was automatic, disconnected from any real consideration. On the side table beside me sat the program from Dad's funeral 3 months ago. His passing at 84 had been peaceful, leaving behind the legacy of a 50-year marriage that had weathered every storm through commitment and respect. "A foundation built right will stand through anything," he'd told me when I apprenticed under him. A notification chimed on Amber's phone. She turned slightly away as she read it, but not before I caught the smile that transformed her face, the genuine one I rarely saw these days. The next afternoon, I returned early from the Henderson site after resolving a zoning issue faster than expected. Amber's car was in the driveway, unusual for a Tuesday when she normally volunteered at the community center. As I entered through the garage, I heard hurried movements upstairs. In our bedroom, Amber stood before an open suitcase on the bed, folding clothes with practiced efficiency. More clothes than seemed reasonable for a short trip. "Early day?" she asked, barely glancing up. The zoning inspector was surprisingly cooperative. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her methodical packing. "Going somewhere?" She continued folding a sweater I didn't recognize. "I meant to tell you over dinner. Travis is going through a really difficult time since his divorce. He needs someone to help him get through the next couple weeks." The name hung in the air between us. Travis. Her first husband, the college boyfriend she'd married at 20 and divorced at 25. The man she'd assured me was completely in her past. "Travis," I repeated, keeping my voice even, measuring my response as carefully as I measured lumber. "And you're going to stay with him?" "Just for 15 days, Amber said, as if this were a perfectly reasonable explanation. "He's struggling, Jack. Sometimes people need help healing." 15 days. With your ex-husband. I maintained my position by the door, watching her hands as they smoothed another new-looking blouse into the suitcase. "When did you decide this?" "It's been planned for a while," she admitted, still not meeting my eyes. "Emily thinks it's a good idea. She knows how much I've always cared about helping others." The mention of our daughter struck deeper than Amber's casual announcement. "You discussed this with Emily before mentioning it to me? Don't make this about control, Jack." Her tone sharpened, the first indication that she anticipated my objections. "I'm allowed to help an old friend through a difficult time." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Through the bedroom window, I saw a delivery truck in our driveway. "I'll get it," I said, needing a moment to process what was happening. As I signed for the package, the delivery woman glanced past me toward the sound of Amber's footsteps on the stairs. "Heading somewhere nice?" she asked pleasantly. That night, I retreated to my workshop in the garage, surrounded by the tools my father had passed down to me. His carpenter's square, worn smooth by decades of use, felt solid in my hands, a tangible connection to the values he'd lived by. "Sometimes what looks like a crack is just settling," I murmured to myself, repeating what I'd told countless homeowners over the years. "And sometimes it's the first sign of structural failure." The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. Michael Peterson, my foreman on the Henderson project. "Jack, got that supplier quote you wanted," he said after I answered. "Everything looks good for Thursday's meeting." "Thanks, Michael. Anything else I should know before then?" There was a brief hesitation. "Probably nothing, but I saw a car that looked like Travis Winters parked near your street the other day. Isn't that Amber's ex? Thought it was strange, since I haven't seen him around for years." My grip tightened on the phone. "What day was this?" "Last Thursday, around 2, when you were at the city planning meeting." After hanging up, I stared at the foundation plans I'd drawn for our home 20 years ago. Every measurement precise, every calculation double-checked. I'd been so certain I was building something that would last. Share this with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't measured by others' treatment. The home office felt different the next morning after Amber left for her volunteer shift. What had once been a space of shared trust now held secrets I needed to uncover. I sat at the desk, opened the financial software, and began my inspection. Our joint accounts showed a pattern. Withdrawals of varying amounts, all under the $500 notification threshold I'd set years ago. Small enough to avoid immediate attention, large enough to accumulate significantly over time. Most aligned with days Amber had mentioned volunteering or girls' nights out. I moved from financial records to phone statements, calls and texts to the same number, sometimes multiple times daily, dating back over a year. I didn't need to check whose number it was. I already knew. In the glove compartment of Amber's car, I found a hotel receipt from 6 months ago. A weekend she'd told me was a women's retreat for church. The dates matched a significant withdrawal from our savings account. The pattern emerged with painful clarity. Each discovery fitting into place like pieces of a blueprint revealing a structure far different than what I'd believed I was building. This wasn't impulsive behavior or a sudden desire to help an ex-husband heal. This was calculated, sustained deception. Later that afternoon, I met Michael at the construction trailer on the Henderson site. The familiar environment, blueprints pinned to walls, the smell of coffee and sawdust, offered temporary comfort in its predictability. Michael closed the door after bringing in 2 cups of coffee. His expression was grim. I've been trying to figure out how to say this, Jack. After I mentioned seeing Travis's car, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Just tell me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I've seen his car there more than once, always during your regular site meetings. And at the Christmas party last year, I noticed how they were talking by the punch bowl. Too close, too familiar. Michael's discomfort was evident. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but if it were me, I'd want to know. Have others noticed? The question felt like gravel in my throat. Michael nodded slowly. Karen, from across the street, mentioned it to my wife, wondering if everything was okay with you two, and Thompson from accounting said Travis was bragging at the golf club about having a special friend who was still technically married. I absorbed this information with the same methodical approach I'd use for discovering water damage in a building's foundation. I appreciate your honesty, Michael. What are you going to do? First, I'm going to have a conversation with my wife, see if there's anything left to salvage. I finished my coffee in one long swallow. Then I'll make decisions based on what I find. That evening, I waited for Amber to return from her supposed volunteer work. She arrived home at 6:30, her expression shifting subtly when she saw me waiting in the living room instead of working in my office. We need to talk about this trip with Travis, I said, keeping my voice even. She set down her purse with deliberate calm. There's nothing to discuss, Jack. I'm going to help a friend through a difficult time. If you can't understand that, it's your problem. I understand more than you think. I maintained eye contact. I know Travis has been a regular visitor here when I'm at work. I know about the hotel stays and the money that's been leaving our accounts. Her expression flickered between shock and calculation before settling on indignation. You've been spying on me, checking up on me like I'm some child. This is exactly why I didn't discuss this with you earlier. Noticing financial irregularities in accounts I manage isn't spying, Amber. Neither is finding receipts in our shared car. You're twisting things to fit whatever paranoid story you've created, she said, her voice rising. Travis and I have maintained a friendship, that's all. He needs my help right now, and I'm going. End of discussion. The front door opened, interrupting our conversation. Emily stepped in, her timing so perfect it seemed orchestrated. Mom, Dad, everything okay? I heard raised voices from the porch. Amber's demeanor transformed instantly. Tears appeared in her eyes as she moved toward our daughter. Your father is upset about me helping Travis. He's being controlling and checking up on me, going through my things. Emily turned to me with disappointment in her eyes. Dad, really? Mom's just being compassionate. Why can't you support that? I looked at my 30-year-old daughter, seeing how completely she'd accepted her mother's framing of the situation. There's more to this than you know, Emily. Like what? The challenge in her voice matched her mother's defensive posture. I considered revealing everything, the financial deceptions, the hotel receipts, the pattern of visits. But Emily's protective stance beside her mother told me she wasn't ready to hear it. Some structural inspections require more than a visual assessment. We can discuss this another time, I said, maintaining my dignity as I turned to leave the room. Amber, you've made your decision clear. You'll leave for Travis's on Friday, as planned. As I walked away, I caught Amber's reflection in the hallway mirror. The victorious smile that flashed across her face when she thought I wasn't looking confirmed what my investigation had already revealed. You can't reason with someone who's rewriting reality. 3 days after Amber left for Travis's, the full extent of the damage became clear. I'd spent those days in methodical documentation, applying the same attention to detail that had built my construction reputation. What I discovered in our home office that Wednesday morning exceeded even my worst suspicions. The bank manager had called, asking about unusual account access attempts. "Someone tried to change the password to your joint investment account, Mr. Harmon. Protocol requires verification with both account holders." After the call, I began a deeper financial investigation. Hidden in a folder labeled Volunteer Schedules on our shared computer, I found spreadsheets tracking account numbers I didn't recognize and transfer records dating back 18 months. A separate document contained notes from a consultation with a divorce attorney 6 months earlier. Karen from across the street knocked on the door as I was printing these records. "Sorry to bother you, Jack. This was delivered to me by mistake." She handed me an envelope, her eyes concerned. "Everything all right? I've noticed you've been alone since the weekend." "Amber's helping a friend through a difficult time," I replied, the practiced explanation feeling hollow. Karen's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Travis Winters, right? I've seen his car here often enough. Thought you should know." After she left, I opened the misdelivered envelope. Inside was a bank statement for an account in Amber's name only, showing a balance of nearly $70,000, money systematically diverted from our joint accounts over the past 2 years. I sat heavily at my desk, the physical impact of betrayal finally breaking through my professional composure. My hand swept across the desktop, sending papers flying in an uncharacteristic display of emotion. 30 years of marriage, decades of careful financial management for our future, all undermined by systematic deception. The front door opened as I was gathering the scattered papers. Emily stood in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Dad, Mom asked me to check on you." Her eyes moved from my face to the financial documents spread across the floor. "What's all this?" I made a decision in that moment. "The truth, Emily. Come sit down." For the next hour, I showed her everything: the financial records, the hotel receipts, the divorce consultation notes, the secret account statements. I explained how her mother had used her as an unwitting alibi, claiming mother-daughter shopping trips that were actually rendezvous with Travis. Emily's face paled as the evidence mounted. "She told me to tell you we were together those days. Said you were being overprotective and needed to let her have independence." Her voice shook. I believed her. "We both did," I said quietly. "She counted on that." After Emily left, needing time to process what she'd learned, I retreated to my father's workshop in the garage. Among his tools, I found the clarity I needed. "A structure built on deception will eventually collapse," I could almost hear him say. I remembered watching him tear down a rotting deck that couldn't be salvaged, rebuilding it stronger than before. Sometimes complete demolition is the only path forward. That evening I made a call to a number I hadn't used in years. "Diane Williams speaking." "Diane, it's Jack Harmon. We worked together on the Westridge fraud case a few years back. I need your forensic accounting expertise on a personal matter." "Jack, of course. What's going on?" "I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before my wife returns from her trip." Diane's voice turned professional. "Financial deception in a marriage. I've seen it more than I'd like. I can start tomorrow if you have documentation ready." "I'll have everything organized by morning," I replied, already mentally cataloging what she would need. After hanging up, I pulled out a blank blueprint from my office supplies. At the top I wrote, "Structural Assessment, Harmon Marriage," and began to map out exactly what needed to be done before Amber returned. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt something beyond hurt and confusion. A sense of purpose crystallized as I applied my professional skills to my personal crisis. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, dignity, and the consequences that naturally follow when trust is systematically destroyed. I labeled the first section of the blueprint Financial Protection, the second, Legal Documentation, the third, Living Arrangements, and finally, Confrontation Strategy. By midnight, I had the framework for reclaiming my dignity. The man who had built structures that withstood decades of storms was about to demonstrate that his personal foundation, while damaged, was far from destroyed. What would you do if you discovered decades of deception? The answer reveals more about your character than theirs. You've had this account for how long? Jennifer Morris, my longtime bank manager, looked up from her computer screen with professional composure that couldn't completely mask her surprise. Established it 12 years ago, after Tom Reynolds' divorce devastation, I explained, sitting comfortably in her private office. Watched him lose everything because he'd kept all assets joint. Dad always said to hope for the best, but prepare for contingencies. Jennifer nodded, reviewing the account details. Smart planning, Jack. Most people don't think this way until it's too late. She tapped a few keys. This emergency fund has grown nicely. And you mentioned some other assets? The property investment in Dad's name that transfers to me next month. My ownership percentage in Harmon Construction that Amber doesn't know about. And the retirement account I established separately after maxing out our joint contributions each year. Her professional mask slipped slightly. Jack, I've managed your finances for 15 years. I had no idea you'd created this level of protection. Neither does Amber, I said quietly. I never thought I'd need it. But Dad watched his brother lose everything in a bad divorce and insisted I create contingencies. Measure twice, cut once, applies to more than lumber. After establishing financial protections and transferring my recent bonus to my secure account, I met with Edward Thompson, the attorney who had handled my father's estate. Financial infidelity often precedes divorce filings, Edward said, after reviewing the documentation Diane had prepared. She's been positioning herself for this for some time. The good news is you've documented everything thoroughly. The bad news is that 30 years of marriage is ending, I finished for him. Let's focus on the practical steps. I need everything ready before she returns. Edward laid out the strategy. Divorce filing, prepared, but not yet submitted. Financial protections fully implemented. Property documentation established. And living arrangements? He asked. Secured a month-to-month rental yesterday. Already moved essential items. I handed him a document. Complete inventory of household contents with photographs and witnesses. Edward looked impressed. You've approached this with remarkable thoroughness, Jack. Most clients in your situation are too emotional to be this methodical. I've spent 40 years managing complex projects. This is just another structural issue requiring proper assessment and response. My next meeting was with Diane, whose forensic accounting expertise had traced every diverted dollar with precision. $78,432 systematically transferred to her private accounts over 26 months, Diane reported, handing me her comprehensive analysis, plus approximately $30,000 in cash withdrawals that align with documented hotel stays and restaurant charges when you were at work sites. All while I was planning our retirement, I said, the irony not lost on me. This level of calculation isn't impulsive, Jack, Diane said, her voice softening. My ex-husband did something similar. The hardest part was accepting this wasn't a momentary lapse, but a sustained campaign. I nodded, appreciating both her professional expertise and personal understanding. How did you handle it? By remembering my worth wasn't determined by his treatment. She gathered her papers. The documentation is conclusive. You're well positioned for whatever comes next. That evening, Michael helped me move the last of my essential belongings to the apartment I'd rented 10 minutes from our home. The space was smaller, but dignified, much like the next chapter of my life would be. "You're handling this better than most would," Michael observed as we carried in my father's recliner. "Not much choice," I replied, locking the front door. "Dad always said there are two types of problems. Ones you can change and ones you can't. No point wasting emotion on what you can't change." "And Amber's betrayal?" "Can't change that. But I can change how I respond to it." I positioned the chair near the window where the afternoon light would be good for reading. "And I can ensure the consequences are proportional to the choices." As we finished arranging the furniture, my phone chimed with a text. "Amber, coming home day after tomorrow with big news that will change everything. Can't wait to see you." Michael saw my expression. "What is it?" "Time to implement the plan," I said, showing him the message. "She's coming home 2 days early, with big news." His eyebrows rose. "What do you think that means?" "Doesn't matter," I replied with the calm certainty that had defined my professional life. "The structural assessment is complete. The response plan is ready. The outcome is inevitable." After Michael left, I reviewed the blueprint I'd created, each step meticulously planned and most already implemented. Financial protection secured. Legal documentation prepared. Living arrangements established. All that remained was the confrontation strategy. I called Edward. "Amber's coming back early, day after tomorrow." "We're ready whenever you are," he assured me. "Do you want me present for the conversation?" "Yes," I decided. "This needs to be handled with absolute professionalism." I spent that night in my new apartment, surrounded by the essential items that represented my life's true foundation: my father's tools, family photographs, books that had shaped my thinking, and the professional awards that demonstrated my integrity and skill. For the first time since discovering Amber's betrayal, I slept soundly. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because I had transformed it into purposeful action. The master builder was reconstructing his life on a foundation of truth rather than illusion. As night fell, I made one final review of everything I had prepared. The evidence was organized chronologically, each document placed in clear protective sleeves and labeled with precision. The legal papers were reviewed and ready. My personal belongings had been carefully inventoried, and the most meaningful items already relocated to my new apartment. In the quiet of the house that had once represented everything I'd built, I walked through each room, mentally cataloging memories: Emily's first steps in the living room, holiday gatherings around the dining table, quiet evenings reading in the study. These memories weren't invalidated by what had happened. They were simply part of a structure that could no longer stand. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Amber. "Can't sleep thinking about seeing you tomorrow. You're going to be so surprised." The confidence in her message confirmed what I already suspected. She believed her announcement would reset everything, creating such shock that all her deceptions would be overlooked. It was the ultimate manipulation, leveraging the impossible to override the undeniable. Michael called just as I was leaving. "Everything set for tomorrow?" "As ready as it can be," I replied, locking the front door. "Edward will be there. Documentation is organized. Financial protections are in place." "And you're sure about this? No chance of reconciliation?" I paused, considering the question seriously. "Some betrayals can be forgiven, Michael. Moments of weakness, lapses in judgment. But sustained, calculated deception over years isn't a mistake. It's a revelation of character." "You're right," he agreed quietly. Just making sure you've thought it through. Measured twice, I assured him. Now it's time to cut once. That night in my new apartment, surrounded by the essential elements of my life, I reviewed the blueprint for tomorrow's conversation. Not to rehearse lines or anticipate every possible response, Amber's manipulations were too unpredictable for that, but to ensure my own foundation was solid. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about truth, consequences, and the dignity of living according to reality rather than illusion. 30 years of marriage deserved a response that honored what had been while acknowledging what was. In the morning, I rose early, dressed with care in the suit I'd worn to receive my Builder of the Year award, a reminder of my professional integrity that would now support my personal stand. The coffee I brewed was strong, the breakfast minimal but sufficient. Every action measured and purposeful. As I drove to the house for the final time as Amber's husband, I reflected on how the skills that had built my career were now preserving my self-respect. The ability to assess structural damage objectively, the discipline to follow proper procedures despite emotional pressure. The wisdom to know when repairs were possible and when complete rebuilding was necessary. Amber's car wasn't in the driveway yet when I arrived. I used the time to make final preparations, arranging the living room furniture to facilitate clear communication, placing the evidence folder prominently on the coffee table, ensuring water was available for what would likely be a difficult conversation. At 10:05, I received a text from Edward confirming he would arrive at 10:45 as planned. At 10:12, the bank manager called to report another attempted access to the joint investment account. At 10:17, Amber's car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched her emerge, practically bouncing with excitement, smoothing her hand over her stomach in a gesture that confirmed everything. She approached the door with the confidence of someone certain their plan would succeed. The moment had arrived. Not for confrontation or accusation, but for truth to finally stand in the full light without manipulation's shadow. The master builder was ready to reveal the structural assessment that would change everything. She entered with a radiant smile, dropping her bags by the door and rushing toward me. "Jack, I have the most incredible news." Her hands moved instinctively to her stomach in a gesture that confirmed my suspicion. "I'm pregnant. Can you believe it? After all these years, we're going to have another child." I looked at my wife of 30 years, the mother of our adult daughter, now standing before me announcing a pregnancy at 56. The mathematical impossibility hung between us. "Travis is going to be part of our lives now," she continued, misinterpreting my silence as shock rather than calculation. "He's so excited about the baby. I know this is a lot to take in, but this changes everything. A fresh start for all of us." The doorbell rang before I could respond. Perfect timing. "That would be Edward Thompson, my attorney," I said calmly, moving to answer the door. Amber's expression shifted from triumphant to confused. "Your attorney? Why would your attorney be here now?" I opened the door, greeted Edward professionally, and invited him into the living room where my wife stood frozen in growing uncertainty. "Please sit down, Amber," I said, gesturing to the couch. "We have a lot to discuss." Sometimes the quietest response delivers the loudest message. "What is this, Jack?" Amber's voice held the first notes of genuine concern as Edward arranged his briefcase on the coffee table. Her hand remained protectively over her stomach, the gesture now seeming more defensive than joyful. "This is a conversation about truth," I replied, taking the seat across from her. "Congratulations on your pregnancy. I assume Travis is the father?" Her expression cycled rapidly through shock, denial, and calculation. How can you say that? Of course you're— Amber, I interrupted gently but firmly. I had a vasectomy 12 years ago after we decided Emily would be our only child. We both signed the consent forms. The doctor confirmed it was successful in the follow-up tests. The color drained from her face. There must be some mistake with the tests. Let's not waste time with stories we both know aren't true, I said, opening the folder on the coffee table. I think it's time we discussed the actual state of our marriage. Edward placed a professional-looking document binder beside my folder. Mrs. Harmon, I'm Edward Thompson, Mr. Harmon's attorney. I'm here to ensure this conversation remains factual and productive. Amber's shock transformed into defensive anger. You brought a lawyer to ambush me the minute I get home, after I've been gone helping a friend? Helping Travis, I corrected mildly. Your ex-husband, with whom you've been having an ongoing relationship for at least the past 2 years, possibly longer. That's ridiculous. We're just friends. You're being paranoid and controlling. Her voice rose with practiced indignation. I opened the folder and began laying out documents in neat, organized rows. Hotel receipts, financial transfers, phone records, all arranged chronologically like a construction timeline. These aren't assumptions, Amber. These are facts. Edward added the forensic financial analysis Diane had prepared, showing in clear detail the systematic diversion of funds from our joint accounts to Amber's secret accounts. You've been spying on me, Amber accused, her eyes darting between the growing display of evidence. No, I've been investigating financial irregularities in accounts I'm responsible for managing, I corrected calmly. Just as I would investigate structural irregularities in a building I'm responsible for constructing. The front door opened without warning. Emily stepped in, her timing once again impeccable, but this time not to Amber's advantage. Mom! Dad! I wanted to be here for— She stopped abruptly, taking in the scene. Edward's professional presence, the documents spread across the table, her mother's defensive posture, and her father's calm demeanor. Emily! Thank God you're here, Amber said, immediately shifting into victim mode, tears appearing with practiced ease. Your father has lost his mind. He's making horrible accusations and brought a lawyer to ambush me. Emily moved slowly into the room, her eyes fixed on the documents. What are those? Evidence, I said simply. Your mother was just about to explain her pregnancy announcement. Pregnant? Emily's eyes widened, turning to her mother with confusion. Amber's hand returned to her stomach, her expression transforming to one of maternal joy. Yes, isn't it wonderful? A miracle at my age. Who's the father? Emily asked directly, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. What kind of question is that? Of course your father— Dad had a vasectomy years ago, Emily interrupted, her voice steady. I remember because you both told me you were certain I would be your only child. Amber's performance faltered momentarily before rallying. There can be failures with those procedures. It's rare, but— Mom, stop. Emily's voice cut through the excuses with surprising authority. I've seen the evidence. The hotel receipts on days you told me we were shopping together, the text messages, the financial records. The realization that both her husband and daughter were aligned against her narrative visibly rocked Amber. Her strategy shifted instantly to counterattack. You've turned my own daughter against me? She accused, glaring at me with genuine anger. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I've been suffering for years. Edward cleared his throat. Mrs. Harmon, I suggest we focus on the factual matters at hand. Mr. Harmon has prepared divorce papers based on the evidence of infidelity and financial deception. He's prepared to be generous in the settlement if this can be handled with dignity and honesty. Divorce? Amber's voice rose in disbelief. After 30 years, you're throwing away our marriage over some ridiculous suspicions? I met her gaze steadily. Not suspicions, Amber. Facts. Documented, verified facts about years of deception. I gestured to the evidence spread before us. I'm not throwing away our marriage. I'm acknowledging that you already did. You planned this all along, she accused, desperation entering her voice as the reality of her situation became clear. Checking accounts, gathering so-called evidence, moving out while I was gone. Yes, I acknowledged, without apology. I approached this like any structural failure, with thorough assessment and appropriate response. Where will you live? She demanded, grasping for some control of the situation. This is our home. I've secured an apartment. My essential belongings are already there. Emily, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke again. Mom, did you really think you could come home pregnant with another man's child, and Dad would just accept it? Amber turned to her daughter, reaching for her hand. You don't understand, Emily. Sometimes relationships are complicated. Your father and I have been growing apart for years. Travis and I reconnected when I was vulnerable. Stop. Emily withdrew her hand. Just stop the stories. I believed you for so long, made excuses for the inconsistencies, even helped you lie to Dad. I can't do it anymore. Amber's sister arrived then, summoned by a desperate text Amber had managed to send. Karen entered with protective energy that quickly deflated as she took in the scene, particularly the organized documentation. What's happening? She asked cautiously. Jack is trying to divorce me based on ridiculous accusations, Amber began, but her sister's expression showed dawning comprehension as she glanced at the evidence. Are those the hotel receipts? Karen asked quietly. And the account statements? Amber's head snapped toward her sister. What are you talking about? Karen met my eyes briefly before addressing her sister. Amber, I've been concerned for months. The stories weren't adding up. The money you asked me to hold for you. As Amber realized her support system was crumbling, her tactics shifted to the final option, threats. If you do this, Jack, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. I'll fight for everything we have. You'll be buried in legal fees for years, Edward interjected smoothly. That would be inadvisable, Mrs. Harmon. The financial evidence alone would constitute fraud in a court proceeding. Mr. Harmon has been exceedingly fair in the proposed settlement. Emily stood, her expression resolute. Dad, I think I need some time to process all this. Would it be okay if I came by your new place later? Of course, I replied, standing as well. You're always welcome, Emily. As Emily and I moved toward the door, Amber made one final desperate appeal. Jack, please. 30 years together has to mean something. We can work through this. I turned back to look at my wife one last time, seeing beyond the manipulation to the woman I'd spent 3 decades with. 30 years did mean something, Amber. That's why I'm offering a fair settlement rather than pursuing fraud charges. But meaning something isn't the same as meaning enough to overlook systematic betrayal. Emily, Edward, and I left together, the sound of Amber's desperate protests fading behind us. As we stepped onto the porch, several neighbors were visible in their yards, their curious glances confirming that the private betrayal had already become community knowledge. "You okay, Dad?" Emily asked as we reached the sidewalk. "I will be," I replied, with the quiet certainty that had defined my professional life. Some structures can't be saved, but new ones can always be built. The following week unfolded with surprising clarity. News of our separation spread quickly, with Amber attempting to control the narrative through selective storytelling. But the mathematical impossibility of her pregnancy, combined with Travis's sudden visibility in her life, created questions her manipulation couldn't answer. Edward handled the legal aspects with professional efficiency, while I focused on establishing my new life with the same methodical approach I'd applied to every construction project. Each day brought small victories: bank accounts properly secured, possessions fairly divided, routines established in my new space. Emily arrived at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, her expression more settled than I'd seen in weeks. She carried a small box of photographs she'd retrieved from the house. "I thought you might want these," she said, setting the box on the kitchen counter. "Mom's been telling everyone you had a mental breakdown and became paranoid about her friendship with Travis." I nodded, unsurprised. "And how are people responding to that explanation?" "Not well, especially after she was seen shopping for baby items with him." Emily shook her head. "Karen told me Mom's sister won't even take her calls anymore after finding out about the money Mom had her holding." "That's unfortunate," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in Amber's isolation. "Dad," Emily said hesitantly, "I need to apologize. I believed her stories for so long. I even helped her cover things up without realizing it. You believed your mother. That's natural, Emily. But I should have seen the patterns, the inconsistencies." Her voice caught. "She used me against you." I placed my hand on hers. We both trusted someone who didn't deserve that trust. The important thing is what we learn from it. As Emily left that evening, she hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of how you handled this, Dad. No yelling, no revenge, just dignity." "That's the only thing no one can take from you," I replied, remembering my father's words. "You have to give it away." And I decided long ago not to do that. The final meeting with Amber took place 6 months later in Edward's office. The divorce was finalized, property divided according to the agreement, and financial matters settled. Amber arrived with her own attorney, her pregnancy now visibly advanced. She barely met my eyes as the last documents were signed. The vibrant manipulation that had characterized our final confrontation had been replaced by subdued resignation. Reality had finally superseded her alternative narratives. "Jack," she said as we prepared to leave, "I never meant for things to end this way." "I believe that," I replied, "but intentions don't change consequences." As I walked out of the office and into the spring sunshine, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only the quiet peace that comes from standing firmly on solid ground. The structure of my life had indeed collapsed, but the foundation of who I was remained intact. The new apartment gradually transformed from temporary shelter to genuine home over the next 6 months. I arranged my father's tools on custom shelves I'd built along one wall. Photographs, carefully selected to celebrate family moments while acknowledging the changed reality, adorned another. The space was smaller than the house I'd shared with Amber, but it contained everything that truly mattered. Emily visited regularly. Our relationship strengthened rather than damaged by the family dissolution. On this particular Sunday afternoon, she examined the blueprints spread across my dining table with interest. "Another project?" she asked, studying the detailed drawings. "Community center renovation," I explained. "Pro bono work. They need structural reinforcement before winter." she smiled. Always building something stronger. It's what I know, I replied, pouring coffee for both of us. We settled into what had become our regular Sunday ritual. Comfortable conversation about her work, my projects, and occasionally updates about Amber. Mom had the baby last month, Emily said, watching my reaction carefully. A boy. She and Travis are living together now. I nodded, absorbing this information without the pain it might once have caused. Are you maintaining contact with her? Limited, on my terms. Emily wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. She's still Amber. Every conversation becomes about her needs, her feelings, but I'm better at recognizing the patterns now. That's an important skill, I acknowledged. Recognizing patterns. I learned it from you. She hesitated, then continued. I've been seeing someone. His name is David. He's an architect, actually. An architect? Brave of you to date someone in the construction world after everything. She laughed. Maybe that's why. I understand the language now, the importance of solid foundations and proper maintenance. Her expression turned serious. I'm being careful, Dad, watching for red flags, maintaining boundaries. That's all anyone can do, I said. Build well and inspect regularly. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I opened the door to find Rachel Stevens, the widow I'd met through the community center project. Jack, I'm so sorry. Am I interrupting? You mentioned coffee, but I can come back later. Not at all, I said, genuinely pleased to see her. Come meet my daughter, Emily. Rachel entered with the quiet confidence that had first drawn my attention, her silver-streaked hair pulled back simply, her smile reaching her eyes in a way that spoke of authentic emotion rather than social performance. Emily, this is Rachel Stevens. She's coordinating the community center renovation. Emily's smile held knowing approval as she extended her hand. Rachel, it's wonderful to meet you. Dad's mentioned your project several times. Has he mentioned I was a structural engineer before retirement? Rachel asked with a gentle teasing directed at me. I keep correcting his calculations, much to his dismay. Once, I admitted, but I didn't mention you were actually right about the load-bearing requirements. The three of us spent the afternoon in conversation that flowed with surprising ease. Rachel's straightforward manner and genuine interest created comfortable space for connection without performance. When Emily left, her parting hug came with a whispered, I like her, Dad. 2 weeks later, I met Amber for the first and only time since our divorce was finalized. A final property matter required signatures from both of us. We met at a neutral coffee shop, the formality of lawyers no longer necessary, but the distance between us unmistakable. She looked tired, the demands of new motherhood at 56 etched in the lines around her eyes. The practiced charm that had once characterized her social interactions was noticeably absent. You look well, Jack, she said after the paperwork was complete. Thank you. How's the baby? Exhausting. A flicker of genuine emotion crossed her face. Travis isn't quite as involved as I expected. I nodded, unsurprised, but offering no commentary. Emily tells me you're seeing someone, she continued, a hint of the old manipulation entering her voice. Moved on pretty quickly. I moved forward, I corrected gently. There's a difference. Amber's gaze dropped to the table. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you hadn't discovered everything, if we'd just continued as we were. We'd have lived a life built on illusion, I replied without judgment. That's not really living, Amber. As we parted outside the coffee shop, she hesitated. Was any of it real, Jack? 30 years together. Was any of it genuine? I considered the question carefully. Parts of it were. The trouble is, a partially real foundation isn't enough to support a life. Walking away from that final conversation, I felt the last weights of anger and disappointment lift from my shoulders. The collapse of our marriage had been painful but necessary, revealing truth that allowed both of us to live in reality rather than illusion. 5 years later, I stood with Emily outside the church where she would marry David, her architect with a passion for sustainable design and clear communication. Her hand rested on my arm as we waited for the music that would signal our walk down the aisle. "Nervous?" I asked. "About marrying David?" "Not at all." She straightened my tie with affectionate precision. "We built this relationship carefully, Dad. Solid foundation, regular inspections, complete transparency." "Sounds like a construction project," I teased. "I learned from the master builder." Her eyes grew serious. "Thank you for showing me what dignity looks like, even when everything is falling apart." Behind us, Rachel adjusted Emily's train, her presence in my life now as natural as breathing. Our relationship had developed with the measured pace of people who understood both the value of companionship and the importance of independence. As the music began and Emily and I stepped forward, I reflected on the unexpected gift that had emerged from betrayal's ashes. The opportunity to build relationships based entirely on truth rather than convenience or compromise. The structure of my life looked nothing like I had planned 35 years ago when Amber and I exchanged vows. But its foundation was stronger, its support systems more reliable, and its spaces filled with authentic connection rather than performed harmony. Sometimes I realized complete collapse is the necessary precondition for building something truly enduring. True strength emerges not from avoiding painful truths, but from facing them with unwavering integrity. For Jack, decades of building physical structures provided unexpected training for the most challenging construction project of all, rebuilding a life shattered by betrayal. The foundation of dignity proved more lasting than the foundation of accommodation, creating stability that withstood even the most devastating structural failure. Many of us have experienced the gradual erosion of respect in our closest relationships, often dismissed as normal aging dynamics or necessary compromise. Yet dignity has no expiration date. What begins as small accommodations can evolve into systematic disrespect if boundaries aren't maintained. The courage to require respect may come at significant cost, but creates possibility for authentic relationships at any stage of life. This journey celebrates the wisdom that recognizes manipulation without becoming bitter, that establishes boundaries without seeking vengeance. Jack's story demonstrates that decades of experience provide not just vulnerability, but valuable discernment. The ability to distinguish between genuine care and exploitation grows sharper with age, a strength that deserves recognition and respect from both ourselves and others. While betrayal at any age brings pain, discovering it after decades carries unique grief, but also unique opportunity. The chance to build final chapters on complete authenticity rather than compromise. Perhaps you recognize elements of Jack's story in your own life. If so, remember that dignity is not just deserved, but achievable at every stage. The master builder in each of us retains the capacity to evaluate our foundations, require the respect we've earned, and if necessary, build something new that will stand the test of time. The master craftsman knows that some structures, once compromised, cannot be saved, but the materials of a life well lived can always be repurposed into something beautiful and enduring. Jack's journey from betrayal to rebuilding reminds us that it's never too late to insist on truth, to establish boundaries, and to create relationships built on mutual respect rather than convenience or manipulation. As you reflect on your own life's structure, consider which accommodations have become acceptance of disrespect, which compromises have eroded your foundation of dignity. Remember that age brings not just vulnerability, but wisdom, the experienced eye that can distinguish between normal settling and dangerous structural failure. The courage to require respect may initially feel like selfishness to those accustomed to your accommodation, but ultimately creates the only foundation upon which authentic relationships can stand. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't determined by how others treat them, but by the integrity with which they face life's unexpected structural failures.